Welcome back, everyone. We hope you're well fed and well rested because it's time for tennis. The North American hard court swing continues. We are out of Canada, south of the border to the United States, which is kind of odd to say. We usually refer to something else that way, but we're in Cincinnati. We're back in Cincinnati. The first time tennis has been in Ohio since 2019. This event last year, of course, was played in New York for reasons we all know. I don't really care how Steve's feeling because Candace is back, my favorite co-host of Eat Sleep Tennis. Happy birthday. How was your birthday? How you doing? How's it going?
Thank you. My birthday was great. You guys helped make my birthday a little bit better. So thank you for that. And glad to be back and glad to have tennis.
All right, Steve, how are you doing? How are things down under, if you will? Do you feel any more optimistic about the Australian Open?
It's a beautiful day. The sky is blue and we're still in lockdown. So it's going great. No, I'm not optimistic for a January start, but I'm really not sure what's going to change that, but you can ask me that every week probably through the next couple of weeks, and you'll probably get the same answer from me.
Well, hopefully things get better. I'll try to be optimistic then. And to distract you, we have some tennis. We'll start with the men's draw here. The big three taking this week off. So our number one seed again, Mr. Medvedev. We're looking at the top half of the draw. He's our one seed. We've got PCB there as the seed at the bottom of the first quarter. Rublev in the second quarter with Shapovalov again. For the second week in a row. A bunch of interesting names here in the middle. Candace, we'll let you go first here. I mean, how do you see the top half of this draw playing out? Can anybody knock off Medvedev?
I think they can. It's just anyone's guess to who it will be. I don't think that he has necessarily the easiest draw. It always helps when you have the bye, but you look to second round, maybe someone like a Brandon Nakashima, who's not a huge name, but he plays well, especially on the surface, and he certainly has ability. But if you go past that, even Bublik, Dimitrov, and potentially someone like, maybe a John Millman or a PCB, it's not an overwhelmingly difficult draw. I just think it's one of those draws we've alluded to in the past that it just sort of keeps coming at you. You don't necessarily have a break. So if you're Medvedev, you'd be looking to get through those first couple of matches fairly comfortably. I don't think you want to be wasting any extra time in those first few matches because he does have a draw that just doesn't really let up. I do have him making it through his quarter, but it wouldn't shock me at all if he were to go down maybe in the latter portions of that quarter. So, we'll see what certainly ends up happening there. I found the second quarter here in this tournament much more interesting, though, from a betting perspective. We were actually talking about it a little bit before we went on air. You have Rublev there at the top, obviously looms large. I think he makes it through his portion, but that bottom portion of the second quarter is anyone's guess for me, right? You have Jannik Sinner, who has ability, but has been a little bit of a roller coaster ride this year. Isner, obviously coming off the back of a very, very good week, always dangerous on the surface, but at his age, can we expect him to back it up this week once again? Benoit Paire suddenly enjoys tennis again. And Shapovalov, maybe the real enigma for me in this quarter. At his best, could he make it through this entire quarter? Absolutely, especially on the surface. But he's so far from that right now that I certainly couldn't have him. I actually looked at the odds yesterday just to kind of get a peek of, what's he sitting around at. I think it was 22 or something, but just way too short given his form. That feels like a very speculative off of his very best ability, and the chances of him showing that here probably are not very high. I ultimately had Isner going through the second quarter. Didn't want to, certainly wanted to go with someone else, but you always have to respect his style of play on the surface. And ultimately for me, I have him taking out Medvedev between those first two quarters, just because he is so well suited. At that point, will he be fatigued? I don't know. That's going to be something we're going to have to find out, obviously, when we get there. And it's very much a possibility. So it is something to keep in mind. And I think that's going to be a real thing to keep in mind if you're wagering this tournament as a whole. If you do have concerns of certain players with kind of a fatigue factor in there, to really, really make sure you're getting the odds you're looking for. I know so often in any sport, maybe you were hoping for 20 on someone, you see them at 18, you're like, it's close enough. I wouldn't be going for those close enough wagers if you have any concerns of fatigue for some of these players.
Yeah, fatigue, you're right. Like you said, is the big concern for Isner and the other noted American serve bot. But Steve, There was another name that stuck out to you who might be able to upset the apple cart. Who do you see beating Medvedev here?
I think, yeah, when you look at the quarter and you go, look, it maybe isn't the strongest or the most intriguing quarter here, but, when you look to, the second portion of this top quarter here, you've got Hurkacz, who, yes, he did lose to Medvedev last week, but has beaten, Medvedev recently and shown that he can match it. But the other one's Pablo Carreño Busta. He's coming off winning bronze in Tokyo, and we haven't seen him since there, but he has a relatively favourable start. He gets a bye as a 7 seed and gets the winner of Millman and Struff to get through to the third round. I think he's one just to kind of keep an eye on here, particularly, you have a little bit of a look at the weather forecast for this week. It looks like it's going to be raining on and off for the majority of the week. He might just be one to keep an eye on, to be able to, coming in fresh off a couple of weeks off, has shown some pretty solid form on the hard courts. I think he's one to really keep an eye on in that first quarter. Looking to the second quarter, this looks very eerily similar to what's been taking place in Toronto this week. You could maybe make a case to back up, and I went for Rublev last week and might go for Rublev again this week. But I think if you keep an eye on through there, I'll be interested to see how a couple of those early matches go. I want to see how Sinner looks early. He did look, disappointing last week, but I think one to keep an eye on if Isner is tired, or if he can, if he does get through here against Medvedev and then has to play the final and then back up, very, very quickly. I think he might be in a little bit of trouble against Norrie. But if he loses today against Medvedev, who they haven't played at the time of us recording this, then I think that actually helps his chances in Cincinnati for next week. Otherwise, you can make a case for Benoit Paire. I'm not going to make a case for Benoit Paire. He'll probably make a couple of really good shots that'll look good on Instagram, but I don't see him getting past kind of the second round here.
Yeah, we'll talk more about him a little bit when we get to our categories. But as I look to Medvedev's draw here, I think Nakashima will be there in the second round. Nakashima is very good, but I'm not sure he's at the point of his career where he's challenging someone like Medvedev here is something he's ready to do. That third round match could be tricky. He could face Roberto Bautista Agut, who is the person who beat him the last time we played this event last year. That was in the quarterfinals. But overall, I think he is going to be a strong favorite all the way through, and that makes sense. He's the best hardcourt player on the men's tour. Once you kind of take Novak out of the equation, these courts are quick, which I think actually suits him quite a bit. So I think there's some names that might test him a little bit, but as the clear favorite, I do kind of have him picked going all the way through. I like what you guys mentioned in terms of people that could challenge him. I think Hurkacz could probably do it if I really had to pick somebody. But as we talked about pre-show, I wonder if the way he lost that match last week really kind of hangs around with him, and he's not able to kind of overcome that in the following week. I would love to back Isner, but off a long week, I'm a little concerned. We'll see how he does. Jannik Sinner was the other name. I wonder if he could kind of rip through this tournament, especially with how good as he is at tiebreakers, which I think we'll have quite a bit of. So all those names are kind of interesting to me, but I have Medvedev's names going through because I'm boring.
I think also it's probably worth mentioning, it's good to see Andy Murray actually back playing singles. I think, we saw him play doubles at Tokyo, but it's just nice to see him actually trying again here to kind of find some sort of form. Obviously injuries have hampered him for years and years now. But I will just mention, I think a couple of times this year I've made a habit of backing and supporting players a week too early. I'm jumping off the Roberto Bautista Agut bandwagon, so I'm sure if anyone wants to jump on, by all means, go for it. Now's probably the time to do it.
Yeah, if he's going to find his form and put it together, he's played well here. And I know in general there's this thought that Spanish players are generally better on clay, but him and PCB here are two guys that are actually better on hard as you go back and look. So a fun top half overall. I think there are some chances for Medvedev to be upset, but I picked him and you guys were a little more adventurous. So although I'm jealous, do we have anything else to cover?
I'm happy to move on to the bottom half.
Casper Ruud, our seed at the top. Zverev, the 3 seed there, sits in the third quarter. Tsitsipas, the 2 seed, down at the bottom again this week. And Berrettini back as the 5 seed here at the top. Again, some other interesting names in the middle, but not to totally give it away. I think I'm going to be a little boring here and probably pick Tsitsipas to win this. He's in pretty solid form. He did lose to Opelka, but again, he's here. It's kind of a nice draw. What do you think, Steve? I mean, who might be able to upset the Greek?
I think it's a nice draw, and you think, looking at that, the biggest I guess, tests for him. I think in the first, I guess, to get to the semi-finals, you're probably looking at maybe Korda and Berrettini. Berrettini's kind of the one that stands out here. Hasn't played for a little while, and this is his first, I guess, real shot back at the top level as he kind of rounds in and prepares for the US Open. So he's one to keep an eye on there. But yeah, look, I think when you look through it, Tsitsipas should be able to make his way through this section of the draw relatively easily. And look, I would suggest that I think Alex Zverev does the exact same thing in the third quarter. I think when you look through it, unless Lloyd Harris decides that beating Nadal the other week is enough to make him beat anyone at the top level, I think when you look through that third quarter, Opelka's probably going to be a little bit tired coming off Toronto this week. And when you look at, yes, Zverev does have the first round bye, but I'm not sure, there's anyone there on his Olympic form that's going to be a significant test for him here. And we might be getting a Zverev Tsitsipas semi-final.
As you start to look at Zverev, he would be the name most interesting to me, obviously. But you wonder, again, what his form's going to be like. And it's not the toughest quarter. I keep looking for people that might knock him off. But Opelka, again, should be really tired. Maybe we see a qualifier kind of mess things up. I'll pull up that list and go through it in a second. But what do you think here, Candace?
Yeah, I totally see what Steve is saying with Tsitsipas there towards the bottom. Of interest to me, though, as he mentioned, is Berrettini. Obviously, we know what form he was in leading through the bulk of the summer. This is his first tournament back in a period of time, but I wonder if that's a positive. Do you have a week where some of these other guys are a little bit tired and he comes in here? Certainly the conditions should suit him if he doesn't have too much rust to knock off. And I don't think his draw is terrible for a guy who has to knock off a little bit of rust. Someone like a Taylor Fritz, that would be a really great benchmark there to kick things off. So I like Berrettini. I like Berrettini actually to beat Tsitsipas there at the bottom. And that'd be a match I think we'd all love to see, certainly if we were able to get it. In that quarter above them, obviously things are much more muddled. You have Ruud there with the bye, potentially going up against O'Reilly, Opelka, or the qualifier. You have Tiafoe, who's shown us some really nice signs of form as well. That quarter for me really depends on Zverev, and we'll see kind of where his head is at, I suppose. When you look at him, he's at moments has been brilliant. Of course, we saw that during the Olympics, but where is he at now? Obviously that would have been very, very big for him, very important for him, for him to get that kind of a victory, and not just for him personally, but to do it for his country as well. It was very clear that was incredibly meaningful to him. Is there any bit of a letdown after that in these couple weeks before we get to kind of a big up again at the US Open? I don't know. That's the concern I would have for him. Wouldn't surprise me if Zverev just steamrolled through that quarter. It wouldn't surprise me if he lost early. So he's not someone who I'm going to kind of be messing with. I think my focus is much more so going to be on Berrettini, but I'd love to see him go against Tsitsipas. That'd be a really fun match.
Now, this is something that occurred to me to look up while I was doing the Net Worth Pod, and I asked Spread and John, and they got this question wrong. But in 2015, Alexander Zverev qualified for the Cincinnati Masters. Since he qualified, how many matches has he won? Again, all of 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19. Oh, and 20.
Something like 3?
Yeah, it's got to be like very, very little that you're asking.
0.
Ooh!
There we go.
Wow.
2015, he loses his first round match to Coric in 3, Shugita in 2016 in 3, Tiafoe in 2017 in 3, Haas 2018 in 3, Kekmanovic 2019 in 3, and last year to Mr. Andy Murray in 3 sets. He has yet to win a main draw match in Cincinnati. I assume that he will do that, but I'd be lying if I wasn't saying I'd place a small wager on whoever he plays in the second round to win 2-1.
In those years, I'd have to go back and have a look whether he's played. Has he had relatively deep runs in Canada the week before, or is he?
Not particularly. He did win Canada one year. I think that was 2017 or 2019, one of the odd years. I'll pull that up quickly.
Interesting. And look at, I think it's also
2017.
It's interesting to have a look, and I think when you look at some of the outright odds for the US Open, that Zverev is edged kind of shorter than Tsitsipas in a couple of places, and now is sitting at that kind of fourth favorite behind Novak, Nadal, and Medvedev. So
yeah, I think go ahead.
So look, it's an interesting one because obviously he did take that big scalp with Novak, and he was able to kind of find that level in Tokyo. But then again, we need to kind of see that over that best of 5, and I wonder, yes, there's question marks obviously over Team hasn't played any tennis, recently due to injury. Federer's been injured, but I did find that interesting now that after, I guess, a lot of the focus has been on Medvedev followed by Tsitsipas, that Zverev's kind of brought himself back into that conversation over the last couple of months.
He's still the one of the group that's had the most success against Djokovic, and I think that really is what stands out. I do wonder if his focus wavers a little bit when one of those guys are at this tournament. He's not looking kind of forward to that. I wonder if he sees Medvedev that way, sees Tsitsipas that way, and kind of gears up for that. But I mean, if he was going to make a run, that this does really look like a nice pocket of the tournament here. Again, unless Opelka gets a little bit of a break and is able to avoid the fatigue, there really isn't anybody stopping him from playing Tsitsipas there in the semifinals. Berrettini could do well. I think he does have the draw to kind of build up some form, but I have no reason to not pick Tsitsipas here. Again, unless Zverev stays hot.
And I think I'd have to have a double check of the rankings, but I think Zverev's about 600 points behind Nadal. So I'm not sure when the seeding comes out for the US Open, but there's a little bit of a difference between being seeded 5th and seeded 4th at a US Open.
Yeah, that helps a lot. All right, guys, any other thoughts on the draw?
No, I'm happy to jump into the picks. Have you got anything else to add there, Candice?
Nope.
Alrighty, let me get rid of the draw off the screen. Now, we'll go alphabetical order. Alex, who is your ace for the tournament?
To no surprise, Mr. Daniel Medvedev. I think that he is, the best player on hard courts when Novak's not around. We'll see how he does against Tsitsipas. If Tsitsipas can make the final. Yes, there's some tough names along the way, but I think he's got a solid draw in a tournament he's won before, in a tournament he's done well in several times. So no reason not to like him on the hard, fast courts here. I'll take Medvedev.
Very nice with the top seed choice there. Candice, who have you gone for as your ace for the tournament?
I'm going with someone else who should like a hard, fast court. That's going to be Matteo Berrettini. Like his place in the draw, obviously Tsitsipas the concern, but other than that, I think it's a fairly cozy leading up to that point for him. I like that he should be able to ease his way in after a bit of time away, and I like that he's fresh. He's been one of the best players that we've seen over the last couple of months, and I look for him to make an impression right away. So Matteo Berrettini for me.
Very nice and fair enough. And I've gone for someone different again. I've gone for Alexander Zverev. I think when you look at his draw, to have a bye, then Lloyd Harris, then Goffin, then Rude as a potential path to a semi-final, I think that's a good way to ease your way back in after a couple of weeks off, coming off a big result in Tokyo. So I'm going to be siding with Zverev. And I think he's around that kind of $6 or plus 500 at the moment, looking at the outrights. Now, Alex, who have you gone for as your value pick?
My value selection, again, it's tough in these men's tournaments given what things look like, but Hubie Hurkacz is 33-1. I have him closer to 20-1, so any number better than 30 looks solid to me. We saw him be very competitive in a match again. He probably should have won against Medvedev. We come back here. They should actually be more comfortable conditions for him being faster, so he has a chance here to play Medvedev early, and if he can close that match out this time, he's in great shape to make a run here. So I think you get a lot of value in that number.
And I agree with you there, particularly with those couple of early rounds for Hubie. Now, Candice, who have you gone for as your value pick?
I'm going with the old man, John Isner. Obviously, it's taken with what we saw in the last week. No surprise. This is the time of year that he typically is waiting for, chomping at the bit. I think the number is large enough to factor in the fact that he might have a bit of fatigue coming into this week after how well he's done last week. But again, draw isn't terrible. Cam Norrie first round, potentially someone like Yannick Sinner. Those, tricky players, but ones that, given his style, he should be able to beat on the surface. It's also very beneficial that the real threat kind of in his little pocket normally would be Shapovalov, who has really, really been struggling lately. So going with the big man, Isner.
Very nice. And I have gone for mean, another one of the old guard, maybe not as old as Isner, but I've gone for Pablo Carreño Busta as my value pick. Again, having that form around beating Medvedev in Tokyo does help. I think, with the weather and potentially being a bit stop-start and having to back up maybe late in the week for some matches in quick succession, I think he's in a good spot there in his part of the draw. And again, along a similar line, I think to your pick, Alex, I think it was kind of picking one or the other there in terms of that value to be able to kind of challenge Medvedev if they were to meet in that quarterfinal and potentially move on from there.
Yeah, it's odd to think of there being value on someone who's close to Medvedev, but you're picking someone that probably has to beat him anyway. And it's actually probably easier to do that a little bit early before he builds up a little bit of form. So I think this is actually kind of a good spot to grab a decent number.
Definitely. And anyone on your unforced error radar, Alex?
Someone I once described as a man whose life is an unforced error has recently been tweeting poop emojis at the ATP. So I don't expect Benoit Paire to really do much this week other than kind of show up, maybe collect whatever check he gets just for being there and going home. I don't know if someone, again, who's been kind of going after the ATP for whatever reason is really interested in playing well, and his first-round opponent, Kekmanovic, should do well. These are great conditions for him. So, Mr. Benoit Paire, thanks for coming out.
And I have gone for Riley Opelka as my unforced error, obviously just backing up off a very long week. I think he's going to be ranked as that if he wins tomorrow, he's ranked 15th in the world, which is impressive considering, he hasn't done a lot across the last 12 months. So it's certainly been a great week for him there. Now, Candice, who is your overvalued player for the tournament?
It's going to be Medvedev because we can't have a tournament if Alex and I don't vehemently disagree. So that's the way that I'm going to go. Again, it's just much to do with the draw. I don't think it's an overwhelming draw. There's not one round where I'm like, this is the danger. Just think it's a draw that keeps coming at you. I think it's unfortunate for him that he has Nakashima so early. Anytime you have some of these young guns that they have talent, certainly Medvedev's good enough that you should be able to beat him, but they just start making those inroads early on in the tournament. That's when I start to worry. So Medvedev, purely a draw play. I think of the big names, he's got the toughest draw of them all.
I agree with you, honestly. It was kind of like last week. I picked Medvedev to win and my overvalued player. I just didn't win this week. I actually don't hate his number around 3-1. It's just about right.
At the time of recording this one, we still don't know which one of those two answers is right for Toronto. Who is your overvalued player for next week, Alex?
My overvalued player for next week is Mr. Zverev. Again, as I mentioned, he shockingly has had not a lot of success here in this tournament, and he is one of the three favorites, has basically the same odds as Tsitsipas, even though he probably has to beat Tsitsipas and Medvedev. So, just simply by that fact alone there, and yes, Tsitsipas has to beat him and also Medvedev, but I'd favor Tsitsipas in that match, and I also think Tsitsipas has an easier quarter to get there. So just really don't like Zverev here at this number. I would need almost 8-9 to 1 to really be interested in him, and we're looking at 5-6. So no interested in the German this week.
And I've kind of gone the other way. Similar kind of train of thought, except with Tsitsipas. I think, obviously Korda is a tricky first-up match here for him if Korda were to get through his first-round opponent. But I think, I don't know, he was disappointing a couple of hours ago against Riley Opelka. He's kind of showing that again, that yes, he can sometimes have really good patches against big servers, but ultimately if he doesn't take advantage of his opportunities, and a bit like he did against Humbert earlier in the week, if he doesn't take advantage of opportunities, he finds himself in precarious situations that he probably shouldn't be in based on his potential and his level. So I think his just price here, when you look at it, is just a little bit short for mine.
Makes perfect sense.
Alrighty, that wraps up the men's. Shall we jump straight into the women's draw?
Yes, unlike the men, just about all the women are here in Cincinnati. I kept looking through. I couldn't think of a single name that wasn't here. But Ashley Barty is our 1 seed again, playing her first tennis since losing in the first round of the Olympics, I believe it was, after Wimbledon. So back on hard courts here. The 1 seed has a bye in some qualifiers. Curious to see how that goes. Barbara Krejcikova, who hasn't lost to anyone but the person who's won a tournament in the last couple months back here. Swiatek at the bottom, Svitolina, a lot of fun names here, Muguruza as well. Candice, what do you think of the top half of this draw?
This is a fun tournament from top to bottom, most definitely. You go here in the top half, you mentioned Ash Barty. I mean, boy, I'd give a lot to see Barty against Sloane Stephens there at the top. That's the way that I have it mapped out. And I'd love to see the two of them play each other. But even just going through that top quarter, I mean, the names that are jumping out, you got Vika there, you got Kasatkina there, you have Muguruza there as well. So many ways you can go. I do think Barty makes it through the top. Another one seed, though, that her draw is not necessarily easy by any stretch of the imagination. I do ultimately have Sloane beating her, but I think I'd be a real fan watching the two of them. I'd love to see that match. I focus from a betting perspective more on the second quarter of this tournament. You mentioned Svitolina, Zachary in there, Ostapenko, Jen Brady. I mean, just again, top to bottom, this is a fantastic, fantastic tournament. I ultimately had Jen Brady making it through her quarter and actually making it through the top half of that draw. It'd be great. Team USA, America, America. But she's had a fantastic year. And I do think it is a quarter that sets up really well for her. Not an easy draw, but players who kind of just from a matchup perspective, she should be able to match up well with. A lot of players with some power that certainly she can, combat that and come back at it with it even more power. She's very good with those types of players.
Yeah, it's just a really fun draw in terms of the first half. Just so many names that you could pick out. What do you see here, Steve?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of potential if you can work your way around Ash Barty here. And I think I am going to be kind of looking elsewhere, particularly for this tournament. Obviously she didn't play very well at the Olympics, coming off that Wimbledon title. And I think after Wimbledon, it did come out how, the severity of her injury that she suffered at Roland Garros was a little bit worse than they were letting on. So I just need to see her play and put together a full hardcourt week, I think, before I really want to get involved with her outright prices in any of these tournaments. Scrolling down, Azarenka, I think, Alex, we talked about this last week. Whenever I back her, she withdraws from the tournament. So it's easier just for me to just kind of leave her at this stage. I think the risk associated with that does rise as you get closer, with a Grand Slam on the horizon. Even though, she did come off, she's effectively the defending champ, isn't she, after her efforts in the bubble last year. So she's got a lot of points here to defend, but I don't know at this stage of her career whether she's actually that fussed as to where she sits in the rankings. I've kind of looked to, in that first quarter, Krejcikova. I think this is another one of those opportunities where, look, I'm probably not going to be backing her against Kasatkina unless I get a really nice price. But I think, yes, it's a tough first round match here for her. But I think if she can really kind of move her way through, probably gets you Stremska and some medical timeouts in the second round. Muguruza hasn't looked great, from what we've seen recently. And I think she can get the better of Ash on the hard courts off not a lot of tennis. So I think Krejcikova is one to keep an eye on there in the first quarter. And then moving to the second quarter, my eyes kind of gravitate to the bottom of the draw there. And Iga Swiatek, I think, gets the advantage of the first round bye, and might be able to cause a little bit of chaos there. I think Ons Jabeur would be a tricky second round opponent, but it's hard to see. If I think Pegula showed yesterday, if you can just kind of stick with Jabeur and keep asking the questions, that eventually you'll get the answers that you want, as Pegula did in that third set yesterday. So I think Swiatek can make her way through there. And, again, Kvitova hasn't looked great. Brady, I can understand the potential, I think, particularly looking at the price as well. And I hope that she can kind of string together a solid week here. And, Svitolina is probably next to some of the closer or the bigger names in that quarter, and, Zachary and Kerber first up as a potential opponent. So, my philosophy is I very rarely get involved in Svitolina outrights, and I don't think that's going to change this week.
Well, we agree on one, disagree on the other. That's why I was relieved to hear you're not backing Azarenka. I was able to find her at 25-1. I think any number 20-1 or better is a really nice number. She has actually kind of a history of not going to Canada or doing poorly there and then coming here and kind of ripping through the tournament. Has won it twice, did win it last year, although the last match was not played. Naomi Osaka bowed out at that point, but a really great surface for her. I don't love that she has to play a qualifier here. She did get a couple matches under her belt last week, and that helps quite a bit. The qualifying field is fairly strong, but if she can avoid, say, Buzkova, Fernandez and maybe Samsonova there in that first match. I think she'll have a chance to get some form. She'll be a big favorite in those first couple matches. And then it comes down to her versus Ashley Barty, which have been very competitive matches. And, if Barty isn't really sharp at that point, I think Azarenka has a chance to find some form in a place that she's comfortable. Muguruza would be someone that would be nice to pick, but just really has been up and down all year and mostly down. So don't really love her in that spot. I agree with Krejcikova. Again, just playing probably the best tennis of anybody this year. If you go back and had to rank everybody and how their year looks, she has done probably the best. And I see no reason for her not to continue there. So like Azarenka and Krejcikova there, I think they have a chance to knock off some of the top seeds. And then in the second quarter, Jabeur is just kind of in a nice spot in the draw. Swiatek generally doesn't play well in these conditions. Lost to McHale last year in the first round of this match after not having played in Canada, which she didn't do last week. Played a couple matches in the Olympics, so might have a little bit of form. But whoever wins kind of that Jabeur-Swiatek match does have a smooth path because I don't think anyone's mentioned Petra Kvitova yet, but not great courts for her. Although it is fast, we're talking about a hot and humid setting, and that's not really good for her. Brady, I almost picked, but I'm just worried about her health. And then she's got Alexandrova there in that first round match. Could be tough. But if she's healthy and playing well, she was one of, if not the best hardcourt player late last year and even early this year when she finished second at the Australian Open. So she could certainly snap into form. I think this is a pretty fun half overall. And there was a bunch of names I could pick as I went through. And I think I ended up with Azarenka. Azarenka beating, who's the name that I picked at the bottom? Zachary. That was the name I forgot to mention. She's made the quarterfinals the last few times she was here. Like her spot in the draw. And another good number 2 there. So Azarenka over Zachary is what I had here in the top half.
I think looking at this, and I was having Candice made a good point, obviously, around Brady as well, that, just having a look at her odds there in that first round, I think she's sitting around $1.90 or -110 or -111 against Alexandrova as to whether it's maybe making a head-to-head bet there to kind of see how she's looking. I don't think her outright price is actually going to come in a great deal because the top 8 names all have buys in the first round, as to whether there's a way that you can kind of get yourself set and look, if she does win, great, then you can use kind of some of your staking from that to be able to then, work your way through the rest of the tournament potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to approach this. There's a couple of those people this week. It is kind of a good week given the big names to wait a match or two and see how it goes.
Because I think that's the thing. There's nothing worse than going, I'm just going to wait. You look at this draw and you go, I'm just going to wait maybe one round. And then like Barty, Swiatek, Kvitova, and someone else will lose in the first round. You go, okay, so they've gone from $80 to $17.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I don't love her number in her first match back. And again, with a foot injury, I'm always concerned. I want to wait and see a couple matches.
The Oh, wow. Preemptive flop. The other thing I was going to mention on that first half was Kvitova. For people who aren't familiar, maybe necessarily with the U.S. and some of the weather at this time of the year, Cincinnati summers are very wet, very humid typically. I do believe those are the expectations throughout the course of the week as well. So just keep that in mind if you do like Kvitova, because we know that is always an issue with her. I mean, another issue is first run against Madison Keys isn't easy even under the best conditions, but just something to keep in mind. The weather very likely not to be in her favor, given a typical Cincinnati summer.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's something we always have to remember, and why you might see the numbers on her be a little bit wonky. So that first round match, Kvitova Keys, probably not going to lead up to the billing it probably gets.
Hang on, question. Will there be more winners or unforced errors in that match?
Oh.
Wow.
Could be the question of the week.
Wow, wow.
I feel like they're just going to be the same number.
Yeah.
Everything just cancels everything out.
There'll be no forced errors. That's a great question. Well done. That got me totally off guard. Any other thoughts, guys, on the top half before Steve tries to push us forward and continue to run over Candace?
I've already pushed us forward. The bottom half's up on the screen.
I like to ask anyway. Pliskova, our seed there at the top. She is in the final. Beat Sabalenka in 2 sets today in Montreal. Will have a bye, so has some time to get here. And not too bad from there. Jessica Pegula right now fighting for her life here to make the finals and play Pliskova. We'll see how that goes. Sabalenka, aforementioned, lost off a long week. Paula Badosa had kind of a bummer of a week, losing to wild card Rebecca Marino. Elena Rybakina lost in the first round, but had some time here. Sam Stosur, don't really know what she's doing here. Elise Mertens continues to struggle. Simona Halep didn't look great. This third quarter for me was kind of funny. Like, they took everybody who was a little bit of a bummer and kind of put them together, whether it be a fatigue fade or someone who hasn't been playing very well. And you look down to the fourth quarter, and do we get Osaka Andreescu, something that we talked a lot about in 2019? Do we get to talk about it in 2021, Steve?
Maybe. It's hard to know with Osaka coming off not a lot of tennis and Andreescu coming off not a lot of fit tennis. And it's a really, tricky little patch there and it almost comes back to the point where you kind of feel, Osaka probably loses in the second round to Coco, or she makes her way through this entire half. There are a couple of interesting names there, as you mentioned. I think, Bencic Vondrousova, the gold medal rematches in the first round of Cincinnati, as neither player receives a bye. Danielle Collins is there to kind of keep an eye on after a pretty solid couple of weeks. But yeah, look, I think looking to the bottom there, probably have to go with Naomi Osaka and moving to the random third quarter of weirdness. Sabalenka, do we get a Sabalenka-Pliskova matchup again like we did, a couple of days ago? It's looking very likely. I think, Simona Halep, while she doesn't get the first round bye, I think she'll appreciate the time on court that she'll get this week. I don't think this is her long-term goal. She looked solid without being spectacular against Danielle Collins last week. Elise Mertens needs time on court after some up and down performances. And yeah, look, I think, Rybakina is probably, looking at the outright odds, you'd probably want a little bit longer, considering how she's played in some of those tighter matches over the last couple of tournaments.
Yeah, I agree there. What do you think, Candace?
Yeah, I don't look at it too differently. I think I look at Osaka exactly the same, right? Either she loses off the bat or she makes it through. For me, I have her losing off the bat, but it's going to be one or the other. I think we're all in agreement there. As far as that quarter goes, I had Danielle Collins making it through. I've really liked her tennis recently. Again, somebody who you expect to do well this time of the year. And I think when you look at the bottom half of this tournament as a whole, there's a lot to be valued about consistent tennis, right? Because we have that third quarter where that's the furthest thing we've been seeing from some of these players. And, even at the bottom with Osaka, you have that uncertainty. I mean, same there with Andreescu. So, I mean, this is like the bottom half where if you can show just some consistency, I do have some value for that at the moment. And it's why it has this kind of gravitating to maybe some of these names that typically we try to stay away from, someone like a Sabalenka, for example. But I have Collins coming out of that bottom quarter. I have her going against Pavlyuchenkova and making it through. Not a terribly easy draw for her, but she is against some players she's had success with. And again, you take the fact that she's playing consistent tennis, and those are some positives for me with her. That third quarter is just a mess, right? I honestly could see almost anyone from that quarter making it through, and yet I could see almost any of them losing in the first round, to be perfectly frank with you. I had Jessica Pegula winning a couple of matches there, especially knowing Halep has not been showing the best of form. I think that's a really great time to go against her if it even gets that far. You could then potentially get someone like a Pliskova. I think Pegula can make a little bit of a run here, but ultimately I had Rybakina coming through that quarter. Again, not a terribly consistent player, but somebody who can turn it on at points. It feels like the kind of quarter that you see her kind of slowly work her way through. So I have Rybakina in the third. I have Danielle Collins at the bottom, and then Collins ultimately coming out of the half.
Yeah, this would be a great situation for Sabalenka, but she continues to play with too small of a margin to put together enough wins over an entire week. She has the bye. I'm not too worried about Martic or Badosa, Mertens, or Rybakina. Rybakina might be tough, but she's beaten Rybakina a couple times at this point. And maybe Pliskova is there. She played very well, but we'll see if she can put it together back-to-back weeks. She does have the bye, so that'll help her quite a bit. It's just too many questions to ask there to really trust anyone there. And as I start to look at Osaka, I think this looks a lot like the Medvedev draw. I mean, Osaka's not nearly in as good a form and at the level Medvedev is right now, but I'm not really that worried about Goff. I'm not sure what Goff does better than Osaka at this point, even though Osaka, again, she just might be totally out of form. That's a possibility. But, I assume she's been playing. She'll have a bye, so a couple days to practice on the courts and things. Her third-round match against Pavlyuchenkova, maybe Pav's can outsmart her, but Osaka's going to just have twice as much talent as Pav does at this point in her career. And then you look at the rest of the way. Maybe Andreescu, she didn't look so great. Collins at some point has to run out of energy. I don't know when, but maybe she's there. Maybe she's not. It's just I'm not too worried about anybody in Osaka's way until we get to the final. But again, sort of as I said last week about Andreescu, like I am going to pick Osaka, I think, but I don't feel great about it.
Now, you did mention with Sabalenka that you're not too worried about Martic or Badosa or Rybakina. Are you worried about Santosa?
No, not at all.
Oh.
We'll talk more about that.
Alrighty. Anything else we want to touch on for this half before we get into our picks?
No, I think we covered it all.
Yeah, I just wanted to take your job there, Alex. Thank you for answering. Alrighty, we'll roll in, and you can lead us off again, Alex. Who's your ace for the tournament?
As I said, in a week where we have a bunch of very good players, I did pick Naomi Osaka to win. I'm not betting on her to win. I don't think there's any value in her number. Curious to see how she looks, but these courts should be very good. Last time she was here, she looked great until she chose not to play the last match in the finals there. Not too worried about her draw, as I talked about. So, as I look at a field where most of the talent and most of the people that I think can really challenge her are in the top half of the draw, I'm not too worried about her getting to the final. And then there, she'll probably be favored. So I'm not going to overthink it and take Osaka.
And Candace, who have you gone for as your selection?
I'm going to go with Jennifer Brady. I like her portion in the draw. I think this is a tournament where there are major questions about sort of our big names in here, whether that's Ash Barty or Naomi Osaka or even Bianca Andreescu or Simona Halep. So it just seems like a tournament that's right for her at the level she's at, right? She's kind of that next tier, ideal circumstances, ideal surface for her. And again, I do like the draw. I understand the trepidation with her foot and playing Alexandrova. That first round is going to be the test. But I think if she makes it through that, I don't think this is a terribly bad draw for her. So Jen Brady for me.
And I have gone for, and you may know from when we're kind of talking through it, that I've gone for Swiatek. I think, she is probably the best odds you'll probably see for her at a hardcourt tournament for some time. I think moving into the future, I think it's a great spot for her in the draw there if she can get through Jabeur. I don't think, she plays pretty well against some bigger strikers of the ball, so I'm not too worried about Kvitova, particularly in these conditions here in Cincinnati this week. And I think working through that, I think this is a slightly more attackable half of the draw if you have question marks around Ash Barty like I do. So happy to take someone from the second quarter here. And I'll just roll into my value pick, which is from the first quarter, which is Krejcikova, who looks at a really nice price. And a little bit like Jen Brady with Alexandrova first up, I think Kazatkina is going to be a really tricky first matchup here for her. But I think, things can really open up for her there. She won't have to face both of Barty or Azarenka. They'll be facing each other before reaching that point. And I think it's a great spot, which is a great price considering the form that she is in across 2021 as a whole, on all surfaces. But, she's looked pretty solid on hard court as well. So that's where I've gone with that one. Candace, where have you gone for your value selection?
For my value play, I went with Danielle Collins. I don't think that's a terrible surprise with how much I was talking about her at the bottom end of the draw. I just think that is a quarter where you want to work your way around those big names. Both of them have notable questions, especially Osaka. And I like what we've seen from Danielle Collins. Maybe it's a week too late for her, but I do think this is a great quarter for her from a betting perspective because she's playing really well. And so we know she's in good form, but there are enough big names near her in the quarter that she's sitting at a really solid price from an odds perspective. So going to go with Danielle Collins and maybe hope we get a couple blips in the rows from the big names, which wouldn't surprise at all.
And Alex, where have you gone with your value selection?
like your pick on Krejcikova, Steve. I've talked about Azarenka, but at 50-1, I think Ons Jabeur is much better than the number we see on the board here. The faster conditions, I think, actually help her serve and are good with her variety. She's going to have Kontaveit here in the first round. I'm not too worried about that. Swiatek is a better player overall, but I wonder if in the faster conditions and not quite having any form, if Jabeur can get past her there. And at that point, it's kind of smooth sailing up until the quarterfinals where maybe she sees Brady, Alexandrova, or Zachary. Again, all players that I think she could be competitive with, if not beat. And then I'm already in the semifinals at this point with a 50-1 ticket in matches that, again, I think if she's in form and, doesn't have to play too quickly, night match, say to morning match kind of stuff, I'm feeling pretty good about her chances.
Fair enough there. Now, unforced error-wise, who have you gone for, Candace?
I have to keep unmuting so you guys don't come after me. Unforced errors wise, I went for Naomi Osaka. Pretty obvious, well-documented reasons at this point. She has seemed like she's, obviously struggling on a number of levels. Gets the bye, but then Coco is going to be a real test right off the bat. And even if she were to make it through that, you'd anticipate someone like a Pavlyuchenkova, who at her best, Osaka should be able to beat, but I'm not sure she wants to deal with a veteran player like that at this stage, just somebody who knows how to win matches if you're going to leave the door open. So either way, I think it's a very, very difficult draw for her, and one that I think we could see her bowing out of pretty early here.
And we'll circle back for you, Alex, to an earlier conversation. Who's your unforced error for the tournament?
My unforced error is Miss Sam Stosur. She's here as a wild card. As I go back this year, she has won exactly one match. She has won, and it looks like about 8. 1 and 8 this year playing tennis. So she comes here as a wild card. She draws Rybakina in the first round. I'll be surprised if she wins more than 6 games, let alone 6 games in one set. Thanks for coming out.
Who'd you take a set off in Tokyo?
Tokyo. Nobody.
Sure
Rybakina beat her 4-2.
Damn. I was hoping there was
hasn't won a set since Prague. Took a set off the immortal Grace Min sorry.
I do want to say that I think the wild card for her here is the second most random thing to come out of this tournament this year. The first being how in the world Fernando Verdasco got a qualifying wild card in the men's draw to just turn up and get bageled by Gasquet in some kind of weird retro rewind.
I would say that Verdasco Gasquet, that is like some flashback to 2011 or something.
Yeah, except now it's in the first round of qualifying of an ATP tournament. So that's fantastic. My unforced error is Simona Halep. Nothing against her personally. Big fan of her game, and probably she is a player that I've been kind of looking at the US Open odds. I jumped into Andreescu for the US Open last week, and I'm looking at Halep at the moment here. I don't think this is her grand final. I think she's just trying to get that time on court. And look, going really deep into a third set against Danielle Collins first up off a very, very long break isn't the worst form when you look at it. So I think she's in an interesting spot here. If we move through to the overvalued players, I have then gone again for Simona Halep. So basically just rewind about 20 to 30 seconds and the explanation will be there for you for that one. Candace, who have you gone for as your overvalued player?
I have gone for Simona Halep. Similar reasons. She's short enough in this tournament, and understandably so. Again, something where you'd have to protect yourself, knowing her ability at her best form. I just don't think she's going to be anywhere near that, and nor should she be. I mean, again, this is not the end goal. We're going forward to the U.S. Open. She's been away for a very long time. I just wouldn't go there. I could see how people could be enticed to, but a very, very tricky draw for someone who still needs, plenty of match play. Magda Linette, no joke, their first round. And then you'd be looking at someone like Jessie Pegula and potentially Karolina Pliskova. So really, really tough draw, which is unfortunate because she's somebody who could use all the court time that she could possibly get. And unfortunately, I'm not sure she's going to get a ton of it here.
Yep, fair enough. And Alex, who have you gone for as your overvalued player?
Petra Kvitova, as we talked about, the weather conditions are not going to be great for her. Yes, the courts are quick, and she has made the semifinals here twice before, but that was in 2012 and 2018 when she was in much better form overall than she is now. If you look at the rest of her performances, she generally wins one match, if that much, and then kind of moves on to the U.S. Open. So to have her here in kind of around 15 to 16 to 1 in the same group as, Pliskova, Azarenka, Andreescu even, it just doesn't make sense to me. So don't see any value in her number this week.
Fair enough. And have you got an answer yet for me as to will there be more winners or unforced errors in Kvitova versus Keys?
No, I don't have a better answer. I still think it's going to be even. I think either someone's going to hit winners and someone's going to hit unforced errors, and I guess maybe there technically has to be more winners. I don't know.
We'll think about it. There has to
Wild
be.
thing to consider.
I wish it was easier to track down forced errors as a stat in general, but such is life in 2021 when you try and cover tennis as a sport. Alrighty, I think about that just about wraps everything up. Any final thoughts on either of the draws from either of you?
No, just excited for the week. Should be fun.
Yeah, I think it's the two kind of best filled out tournaments we've had in a long time. We've had a lot of big tournaments in name where we're missing a lot of players. So it's just good to have everyone back, minus, the top three guys.
Yeah. And look, we need to get used to them not being there. Well, two of them anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, it's going to be a really big couple of weeks of tennis. I think we've got here, then straight into US Open qualifying, and then another Grand Slam, and I think then a bit of a break, and then Indian Wells randomly later in the year. So there's a lot of big tournaments coming up over the next couple of months. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, follow on any of our podcast platforms or YouTube. If you have any questions of any of us, feel free to either contact us on Twitter at Eat Sleep Tennis or through any of our personal handles, which are all in the Twitter handle there for the show. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and we will be back next week, maybe late next week, to cover off the US Open. Have a good week.